I don't like sand.
It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Which is extra annoying now because I start each zone naked to increase the challenge factor, you know? They don't call me Sandy Cheeks for nothing. This is the first time I've actually ever seen a desert in an official Elder Scrolls game before. I've played Moonpath to Elsewhere, and if you haven't tried that mod out for Skyrim, it's an awesome mod. It has some really great lore, but it is around 6 years old, so it is a little dated. But Reaper's March is actually the first official desert zone I've ever seen in an official Elder Scrolls title, so it was really cool. But hey, we made it. Welcome to the grand finale of the Aldmeri Dominion storyline. It's taken me over 100 hours of gameplay and another 100 hours or so in editing, so it feels like an achievement in and of itself. Speaking of achievements, I apologize for the massive 3-week break between my last video and this one, but I actually just graduated university. By the time you're watching this video, I'll have gotten my degree and attended the convocation ceremony. It's been a little hectic, you know, signing all the paperwork, visiting family, looking for jobs, but as far as excuses go, I think that's a pretty good one. Not to mention, Malbaltor didn't leave me in a fantastic mood to continue this series, but, you know, we press on. This video marks the completion of about 30% of ESO's base game, 1 out of 3 of the faction storylines fully complete. So if you want to catch up on any of the previous episodes before this one, I've made a playlist sorted in chronological order, so you can click once and enjoy the show. Cards should be on screen now, but the playlist link is also in the description too. So without further ado, let's roll the intro and get started. Hey, my name's Frostbreak. I've been playing Skyrim since I was 11 years old, and despite the Elder Scrolls Online coming out just 3 years later, I've never really given it an honest try. I've tried to play it over the years, but every time I pick it up, I always put it back down just a few days later. It just never stuck with me. That is, until now. I'm playing the Elder Scrolls Online a little differently this time around by imposing 5 simple rules I must follow. As soon as I step foot into a new zone, I am permanently locked inside until it's 100% complete. In order to leave, the entire zone guide must be complete. All achievements and fish will be mandatory to collect. Potions, buff food, and other consumables are strictly prohibited, the only exception being consumables that increase fishing luck. I'm a broke university student, and I didn't have $80 to buy a new ESO account with all the DLC, so I'm using my father's. To compensate, I'm not going to use any of the champion points he earned during this entire series. The only exception, of course, will be the green ones that assist with fishing luck. Finally, to make things even more challenging, all money and gear are stripped from my character as soon as I cross the threshold into a new zone. I must barter, earn, grind, or steal to equip my character from the ground up every time. With these rules in place, I'm challenging myself to slow down and approach ESO in a more RPG-centric manner, treating each new zone like a completely standalone experience. I'm a huge Elder Scrolls fan, so with all my restrictions in place, I really hope it helps me discover this massive world in a brand new light. This is a Skyrim player tries to 100% the Elder Scrolls Online. Let's talk about my gear first. As you've just heard by the new intro, I'm forced to strip my character down to his lizard undergarments when stepping foot into a new zone. No gear, no gold. I still have my spells, but they basically do peanut damage without any gear to support them. Luckily, the first thing I did when I stepped foot into Reaper's March was the Vine Dusk Village Point of Interest. I know quite a few of you are attempting this challenge alongside me, so if you are, this is a great place to start because halfway through, there's an armory with heavy armor and melee weapons. Nothing my character would normally wear because it's all heavy and it's all enchanted and it's all white, but at least I wasn't naked anymore. One positive side effect I noticed after implementing this rule and adventuring through Reaper's March is that I was starting to pay more attention to loot drops, or looking through crates and trying to see if there's anything valuable inside. I was also paying more attention to item sets, which I admit is a feeling I missed. Getting purple gloves or a blue weapon from a quest reward is a pretty massive upgrade. You can really feel the difference. In a game like ESO where everything is scaled, changing your armor around generally doesn't feel any different. But going from no gear to having gear does feel like quite a bit of a change, and you can really feel the increase in power, which is really cool to see. Mixing and matching my gear to try and get the best bonuses I could was also really fun and something I look forward to doing in future zones. The best overland set for my Arcanist was the heavy set, Soulshine. This set gives increased crit chance, spell damage, weapon damage, along with even more damage during channeled abilities like my beam attack. It is heavy armor, so it's not something I would have normally ever tried, but because of this challenge I was able to. The other 2 sets for Reaper's March were alright. I did use the medium armor for my second set because of the stamina bonuses, But Skooma Smuggler, which is the light armor set, was useless because I don't use magicka, I mainly use stamina, and according to my rules, I don't use consumables, so kind of lost all its flair. Now to segue off of the gear I was collecting in the Overland, this definitely made world bosses harder. I think I was only able to solo 2 out of 6. I did get this weird bug while soloing a dragon dude, and I just randomly got credit for a world boss I never did. I don't know what's up with that, but I suppose on paper, technically I soloed 3, and if I didn't record it, I wouldn't blame you for not believing me. But that's never happened before, that was kind of weird. I attempted all of the world bosses, of course, but most of them killed me very quickly, so I just had to sit on the side and wait for another player to walk by and help. Reaper's March is very populated, which I would say it's more populated than any other zone I've done so far in the Aldmeri Dominion. There were loads of people running through, so I just kind of sat on the side of a world boss that I couldn't do. I just said in the zone chat, hey, I'm at this world boss, if anyone wants to do it with me, that'd be great. Always people came by, always 2, 3, 4 people came by to help me. There's lots of people in this zone, so if you're going through this as well, just ask in the zone chat. I'm sure there's going to be lots of people who can help you. Now that being said, fair and square, I was able to solo 2 world bosses in the final faction zone with literal scraps on my back, so take that as you will in terms of difficulty and scaling. Reaper's March took just over 17 hours to 100% complete, which seems to be par for the course for most Aldmeri Dominion zones. The longest activity were the point of interest missions, which took almost 6 hours to complete them all just on their own. Now, I take my time. I listen to the dialogue, I talk to optional NPCs, so you could probably do these faster. The average point of interest mission time was around 18 minutes, which is pretty long compared to the other zones. Most of the POIs in this zone were decent. I'm actually struggling to think of any that were bad, but at the same time, there weren't too many that stood out as exemplary or unique. There were quite a few that were a little cookie cutter, yes, oh, this town is overrun by hostiles and we need to clear it out. I've come to expect that for most ESO zones, there's always going to be 3 or 4 of those in pretty much every zone I've done so far, so I've tapered my expectations a bit. The best point of interest mission was probably Senalana, where you get to decide if Razumdar lives or dies. I know how much you guys love him, so of course, I chose to kill him. I'm joking. I picked the option where he lives, but he has to deliver this crown thing somewhere and he kind of hates me for it. Now, I've been made aware by most of your comments that Razumdar does appear in future DLC and future chapters, so I'm left to assume that this decision wasn't a real decision and he always lives somehow. That does take quite a bit away from the choice, I won't lie. That kind of makes it seem like didn't really affect the story at all. But, in the moment doing that, I really stopped and I really had to think. I was like, okay, it did feel like a big choice in the moment. So before we jump into the story as per usual, we're going to take a look at some of the notable characters of Reaper's March. The 2 most important characters are the sisters, Shazza and Kali, who are often referred together as the Lunar Champions. They were both born at the same time under a specific position of the moons, and both have equal claim to become the next main of the Khajiit. The Colovians are the main antagonistic group of this zone. They're Western Imperials who are always looking to annex parts of Reaper's March to be under their control. When you get into the zone, they actually control the city of Arenthia, and part of your mission is to clear them out. The Dark Main is also pretty important. Although it's not the main, overarching super bad guy, I would argue it's the most prevalent bad guy. It's an eternal spiritual force that's the native enemy of the Khajiit. The Dark Main takes control of the current leader of the Khajiit, Main Akuzuri, who we've met quite a few times before in previous zones, but he's forced to do terrible things against his will to his own people. I'm going to try and do my best to summarize the main story of Reaper's March in 3 minutes or less. The story itself took a little over 4 hours to complete normally, so of course there's going to be missing details and content in this segment, but it's a quick summary, it's not meant to include all the details. When you enter Reaper's March, you immediately are aware of a fortress that's under siege by the Dark Main's forces. You go to assist and help one of the Lunar Champions, Shazza, to close the breaches that are leaking demons into the fort. After helping her, you speak to the First Main, which is what I will continue to call him because I have no idea how to pronounce that name. He gives you some special magical sauce that lets you enter the sacred temple that's normally sealed off. Inside, you meet Shazza's twin sister, Kali, and the 3 of you together shut down the corruption plaguing the fort. You chase down the Dark Main to the city of Arenthia, where it's overtaken by Colovian forces. The Colovians are trying to convince the citizens of Arenthia that they come in peace and mean no harm, but they're also constructing a dark anchor in their backyards. You blow up the anchor, and you battle the Dark Mane in an attempt to free the main Akuzri. You are successful, but the main is ashamed of all the horrible things he was forced to do against his will, and he steps down as the leader. After your assistance against the Dark Mane, Shazah suspects you might be the Moon Hallowed. This is some kind of spiritual guide for the Lunar Champions who gets to decide who's worthy of the main's title and responsibility. You then head to Raqqa, hopefully I said that right, where all the Dominion leaders have gathered. You discover the Dominion is more fragile than ever, and a new main must be appointed immediately for the security of the faction. The Lunar Champions must undergo a set of trials before they can be selected as the main. Your job as the Moon Hallowed is to be their guide and assist them through any challenges they may face. Basically, both sisters must go into the Dagobah cave and fight Darth Vader, aka their biggest fears, and you're supposed to help and judge them during the process. Unfortunately, the Dark Mane isn't dead yet. You are only able to free his grasp from the main Akuzri. He's situated deep in the Temple of Moonmont, and the sisters must assist you as part of their trials to become the main. After figuring out all the puzzles to unlock the Inner Sanctum and having an epic battle with the Dark Mane, one of the sisters must stay locked in the temple for an eternity in order to hold back the Dark Mane and keep it imprisoned. You must choose which sister to sacrifice and who will live out their days in the temple and who will live out their days as the leader of the Khajiit people. Whichever lunar champion you chose must undergo one last trial. You must go to the plane of Jode with your champion and live through visions of the future, observing what happens to the Wood Elves, the High Elves, and the Khajiit if the Dominion fails. After observing the future of the Dominion, the lunar champion must walk the final path and face off against the Dark Mane once again, who forces you to fight the other sister you sacrificed in the temple. After defeating the other sister, you must then face off against the leader of the Colovians and the Dark Mane himself once more. After conquering these challenges, the lunar champion you chose is appointed the title of the main in a big celebration with all the leaders of the Dominion. I'm actually going to do something a little different. Normally I do pros and cons right after the story analysis, but I kind of rehashed them in the verdict portion of the video anyway. So for this video, we're going to try and just jump right into the verdict. In this segment of the video, we give each zone we're in a 5-star rating. The rating is comprised of 3 smaller categories: the zone itself, which includes 2 sub-portions, the environment and the design, the main story of the zone completed through the main campaign, and finally, what I thought about all the side content the zone had to offer. So let's start off with the main story. Since we just covered the summary and it's all fresh in our minds, let's get into it. I would probably give the main story a 3.5 out of 5. Firstly, you have to love the Khajiit and appreciate the Khajiit in order to enjoy this zone. If you don't like that race of people, you're not going to enjoy this zone because 90% of it is about the Khajiit. There's a little portion of it that is about the Colovians, which is the Imperial faction, which is pretty cool, but most of it is about the Khajiit, obviously. I'm a big fan of the Khajiit. I think the Joan and Jode mythology or religion is extremely interesting, and for me, I'm not letting it affect my record. It was a good story. If you remember, my big complaint about Auradon, the first zone we did in the Aldmeri Dominion, was the lack of player agency. There just wasn't much you could do as the player to influence the story. That is the complete opposite for Reaper's March. You have a massive choice that occurs, 60 to 70% of the way through the main story. Picking the lunar champion, picking who you think is the champion of this zone is an incredibly important decision. The other one, as far as we know, unless it's a Razumdar situation, is dead for good. The dialogue, your interaction with other players, the final ceremony, it's all dependent on who you pick to be the lunar champion and the main. Anyway, I thought that was awesome. It deserves serious props for that. This is the first and only story, I think, where we've had this much of an impact on the main story. Now, let's talk about why I don't think it's 5 stars, why I think it's 3.5 out of 5. It didn't really feel like a grand finale. It kind of just ends like every other zone. For people who have gone through 5 of these zones, probably you're looking at 20 to 30 hours of playtime. It just ends like every normal zone. It just, oh, thank you. And the queen even says, hey, thank you for your help. I have a message for you. And there's no message on the end. I tweeted this out and I got one of the developers to reply. And basically, this was supposed to lead you to Cold Harbor or something. But once Tamriel Unlimited came out, that's not there anymore. So the finale just kind of ends up in the air. Which, give or take, I'm not going to judge that too harshly, but it did definitely feel odd. Despite the odd cliffhanger, I would have loved if there was a finale reward. You know, if you went up to Queen Irene and she's like, thank you so much. You are the reason the Dominion survived today. You are, you know, the best Eye of the Queen we've ever seen. Here's my sword. Or here's my brother's crown. Or here's the Staff of Magnus. You know, we're told throughout 70% of this faction's story that the Staff of Magnus is an incredibly powerful artifact that Dominion needs. And one of their big issues is they don't have a way to safely store it or have a way to, you know, safely contain it against the other factions. Why? You would be the perfect recipient for this gift. It would be great if it was a purple or even a legendary level item that you got at the end of the story. Other MMOs do this. When you finish a giant story and you finish a huge campaign, you're given something at the end that cosmetically or even its power level signifies, you know, a level of importance that you did finish a major milestone. How cool would it be if we got the Staff of Magnus and it was a legendary item and it was a set 1 of 1, and as long as you have it equipped, corpses you kill explode and they do damage in an area? That would be awesome. I'm a little disappointed that there's no finale reward, and since there isn't one for the Dominion, that means there's probably not going to be one for the other factions. Even if it was just a cosmetic item, like I said, Prince Naaman's crown, that would be cool. You know, something to signify and shows other players, okay, this guy's done all the Aldmeri Dominion stuff. I don't know, just an idea. I was just a little disappointed by the lack of flair for the finale. My other criticisms about the story themselves and not so much the mechanics is that I don't even know who the main antagonist is. It's a Tharn, I know that, and you fight him at the end, and people always talk about, oh, this Tharn guy's running the Clovians, and he raised the Dark Mane, but, like, is he really the main villain? I feel like the Dark Mane's supposed to be the main villain. I don't really care about this Tharn guy. He didn't mean anything to me. I don't even remember his first name. It's like Tavard or Javard or something. This isn't really a good or bad thing. I just wanted to point it out that Khenarthi's Roost, which is arguably the only other Khajiit zone in the Aldmeri Dominion storyline, has a pretty similar soul for a soul story that Reaper's March has. You actually play out that exact same arc between a teacher and a student, where you go into this like cave and there's like a soul who's like super bad. He's going to try and corrupt the island, and you have to choose to sacrifice the teacher or the student to stay there forever and contain the spirit. It's almost shot for shot the exact same as Reaper's March. So for all you Khajiit players, I do feel a little disappointed, you know, on that behalf. But other than that, I think Reaper's March makes up for it in terms of Khajiit lore and the story overall. Alright, so let's talk about the environment and the design. This is going to be a tricky one because Reaper's March doesn't have the detail. When you look at the horizon in Reaper's March, it's just desert. There's nothing interesting, and even though it's the same biome, desert, you can only spice up desert as much as you can, right? Like, it's not the developer's fault. Like, there's only so much you can do with desert. Now, there were some beautiful locations and points of interest. There was one point of interest missions where it's like a pranking festival or something, and you go to this oasis, and it is, I think, one of the most gorgeous tropical locations I've ever been to in any video game ever. Beautiful skies, beautiful beaches, sands, this was phenomenal. This is what I wish Reaper's March looked like. You know, compare these two pictures. Obviously, the two extremes. You've got the fart gas for this POI and what Reaper's March normally looks like in color scheme. And then you've got the beautiful tropical island you get in this same POI mission. It really demonstrates both extremes of the environment. So for the environment, for desert overall, I would probably give it 2 stars, but the design is pretty great. It's pretty open. You can go kind of anywhere you want. There's no major cliffs that you're going to get stuck on, so I'm going to give it a 3-star overall. The cities are laid out really well. They have really good player hubs. I think Rolcott, however you pronounce that, that's difficult for me to say, but that's a big player hub. There's a lot of people there. Arenthia is a really big and well-designed city. I really like the Khajiit and Imperial aesthetic designed together. I think it's awesome. If you set a waypoint down at a world boss and you want to walk there from one side of the map to the other, you can do that. You're not forced to take the paths. You can try and climb the mountains. You can go down the ravines. The design is much more open world. I really enjoyed walking around and not using way shrines in this zone because I didn't feel like I had to. And that's probably something that comes with a desert. You know, everything is open and easily accessible, but, you know, I do think the design was quite good. So let's talk about the side content, the final category. I'm gonna give Reaper's March 4 stars for side content. I think it had some of the best. It had the best public dungeon I've ever done. The Vile Manse, I think it was called. It was huge. It was beautiful. It had these awesome tables. You get inside and it's literally a mansion for you to explore. And that doesn't even start the public dungeon. You go downstairs, there's like 8 bosses to face. It's this really cool, like, you know, necromancer aesthetic down there with like skeletons attached to pillars. You face Oh my god, at the very end, you go to this just like ice area down below. You get to face off against Hermaeus Mora's champion. You kill him, you talk to Hermaeus Mora. He's got a bunch of cool stuff to say to you. Again, I'm a huge Hermaeus Mora fan. As you can probably tell by my class, I only came back to play ISO because it had the Arcanist and because it had ties to Hermaeus Mora. Hermaeus Mora gives you this book that you can open up and talk to him at any time, and he pops out, and it's awesome. It's the best public dungeon I've ever done. It was hard. I died quite a few times in it. It was great. Zero complaints. Maybe my only complaint is there were a lot of players doing it, and I don't blame them because it's probably a good spot to grind. There were a lot of mobs and bosses there, but it's also just beautiful. I loved it. As I said at the very beginning, none of the points of interest were bad. They were all either mediocre or good. There's one where this wizard guy has to clear like Daedra from a forest, or the Bosmer in the village that he's trying to help are going to eat his wife as punishment if he doesn't do it, and that's like immediately grabs your attention. You go to help this guy, you find out the Daedra are actually being summoned by Clavicus Vile, which is another Daedric prince, and his like dog, and then you try and you help the dog, and the dog helps you get rid of the Daedra, and his wife doesn't get eaten. It's crazy. It's a roller coaster of a POI. You got Senelana with Razumdar, which is also a really good, impactful decision. Hopefully it's an impactful decision, but that was also really good. You've got the point of interest I mentioned earlier, where it's like a big pranking festival, and you go into this crazy like dimension, and it's beautiful, and there's a bunch of people doing stuff there. You gotta throw chicken at people. That's a great point of interest too. There's also an Indiana Jones style point of interest, which I love, where you go into a temple and there's traps and puzzles and enemies you have to fight, and at the very end there's this artifact that you're supposed to get that's super important. That was cool too. Yeah, as I said earlier, almost none of the points of interest in the zone were bad. Quite a few were good, and the other chunk were average, so by definition, that's above average, so it gets a 4-star from me. And again, the points of interest are pretty long. They're pretty thorough. There's a big 45-minute one where you're in this big like orc encampment and you're fighting different tribes of people to become this champion of this massive tournament. I think I only got the first bit recorded for that one because the file size was so big it actually corrupted. But it's a 40-minute one. You've got these different champions, different arenas you have to fight. You get a bunch of rewards. It was a pretty good point of interest. Anyway, I'm sure you're tired of my ranting. Let's get into the final verdict of the zone, the final 5-star rating of Reaper's March. I think I'm going to give Reaper's March 3.5 stars out of 5. For me, it did not punch the finale factor, and that's pretty important for the final zone of the, entire faction. I'm also not a huge fan of the desert, and that's just my personal opinion, and there's only so much the devs can do because it's a desert zone, right? It takes place in a desert. I just found it was all desert, There's barely any oases, there's a couple ponds and rivers, there's no real jungle area, it's just desert. But you think of the meat and potatoes of Reaper's March. You've got the main story, you've got the side content. Those are really the big things, right? And those, by definition, were definitely above average. I had a really great time going through those, and although the points of interest were the biggest chunk of the grind category, I enjoyed going in every day and playing a couple missions. They were always pretty good. At the end of the day, I have way more positive things to say about Reaper's March than negative. My only negative criticisms are about the actual mechanics. They're about the environment. They're about the how the design and the story structure at the end of the story works and how it didn't really live up to be a finale. But those are mechanical things. If you're a Khajiit player and you start in Reaper's March with Tamriel Unlimited, I don't think it would be that bad of an experience. The story is pretty standalone-ish. Yeah, it's important that it's related with the Dominion, but it's actually a pretty good standalone story. The next video I'm going to make is going to be about Cold Harbor. It's going to be doing the main campaign and 100%ing the Cold Harbor zone. After that, it will be 1 or 2 DLC zones, depending on how much I like the first one, that my members get to vote on. So right now, I believe Hrothgar is winning, or Orsinium, whatever it's called, the one with the orcs. That's currently where I'll be going to after the main campaign. And this is a great time to thank my members for supporting the channel. If you are a member and haven't voted on that poll, please do so. It's members exclusive, so only you can see it. And if you'd like to consider becoming a member, that's a great way to support my content directly, and I greatly appreciate it. It's completely optional and unnecessary. It doesn't need to happen. I do this stuff for fun. I don't expect to be paid from it, but I appreciate it all the more. Another video I'd like to do before I get into some of the other content and start a new faction storyline are my thoughts as a new player after completing 30% of the base game of The Elder Scrolls Online. I want to do a tier list on all the zones I've been through in the Aldmeri Dominion. Now that I've completed all of them, I want to see if any of my ratings changed, if I put anything higher or lower, now that I've experienced all that this faction has to offer. I think that video is going to be a fun one for me to make because I don't actually have to go in and play for like 20-30 hours to get content for. I can just kind of do it right now out of the gate, so expect that one coming up soon too. And before I sign off, I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching. It has been a hell of a journey. It's been just over 2 months of me making videos on this stuff, and I can't believe how many people watch it. Every time I upload a video, I'm astonished by tens of thousands of people who come to watch my experiences. It's just it's a surreal experience, and I just want to say thank you. You know, these videos take a hell of a long time to make. 20 hours playing, 20 hours, editing, script writing, recording, all that stuff. So they really do take a long time. And you guys have been super supportive, and I just want to articulate how appreciative I am. But that's all I have to say today. Thank you so much for watching the Reaper's March video and sticking with me through my entire journey in the Aldmeri Dominion. I look forward to seeing you in Cold Harbor and experiencing the main campaign ESO has to offer, and I hope to see you in the next one.